Shot fired.
When can the state kill somebody? It's a question that comes up whenever somebody dies because of an action that the state, which is all of us, took. And I think if that means all of us, then we should all have some understanding of why it's happening and if it's necessary.
Fatal police encounters in Vermont have been on the rise since the 1980s. Over the past decade alone, 17 people were killed by police.
Last year, 2019, was the deadliest year in the deadliest decade since records have been kept going back 50 years. It's just one steady trend from the 1970s up through the 20-teens of more and more people being killed by police. I think that's something that should make all of us pause and ask a lot of questions. You just have a lot of questions when people die without a really good explanation for how the whole thing happened, other than he was shot and ended up being killed by police. And that's a small piece of many of these stories, really.
Back up! Back door.
Certainly our officer-involved shooting numbers have gone up quite a bit. There's a number of factors, and I don't know how you measure exactly what causes the increase, whether it's, substance abuse, property crime, mental health related. I think it's just a combination of a lot of that.
Mike, come here. I want to talk to you.
No, so you guys can arrest me. Fuck that, man. Fuck that.
What's that in your hand?
A recorder.
Okay, good.
Law enforcement in general do an awful lot to avoid firing shots. I mean, that's the last thing troopers want to do when they show up at a call that presents that type of situation. Sometimes you can be put into that scenario and not know the person's life history or where they were half hour prior to that. You might not know.
What are you going to do, shoot me?
Come outside, Mike.
What are you going to do, shoot me?
We're not going to shoot you.
Well, of course you are.
Nope.
Of course you are. Why?
Mike?
Why?
That's all part of the de-escalation, is trying to, talk that person out of that situation, to ask them, what's going on in their life and how can we help. A lot of times we're successful. Sometimes that scenario doesn't play out as successful as we would wish.
He's coming around towards the cruiser side of the building.
I would say it seems more that officers are faced more with what people would refer to suicide by cop situations. Essentially, that term is associated with persons who are suicidal and are putting themselves in a position where they're creating danger to the officers or other people present, which ultimately results in officers shooting that person involved. Many times it could result in death.
He's got it to his head. Coming out. Drop the gun! Do it now! Drop the gun!
There's a number of reasons why those scenarios play out the way they do.
Shots fired!
Sometimes you don't really know how the situation got to be what it is.
Hey, Mark. Where do you live, Mark? Come on. Let's talk about this. What's the best option to get you some help?
Many of the people who have been shot and killed by police have been people with a mental health problem. And I can't believe that anybody feels good about a case like that gets resolved by the victim being shot and killed.
I can't get around unless you just. As soon as I see him, I'll. Yep.
Hold on. Let me get it. He's got it.
Regardless of the circumstances, every police-involved death since 1980 shares one characteristic. The officers were cleared of wrongdoing by the Attorney General's office.
We've
come to the conclusion, and I rule today, that the shooting and death of Nathan Giffen was justified. Therefore, there will be no criminal charges filed against any of the police officers involved in the shooting.
That's why some lawmakers are pushing for a stricter standard about what constitutes a justified use of lethal force.
There's no place where somebody can go and look and say, well, what is our state law on what is considered justified use or not? If you don't have a statute, you don't have a place to look. And so all you hear is the Attorney General's press conference, and you say, but wait, there was more to it than that.
Top-ranking law enforcement officials have hesitated to support the change.
I come to this conversation in my role as a prosecutor who reviews officer-involved shootings. And the vast majority are justified. Those are my rulings, based on the facts and based on the legal standard. But I don't think anybody thinks that an outcome that results in the death of somebody is a good outcome. And that's our challenge.
Nobody ever wants to be involved in these scenarios and have to be involved in a shooting. I mean, you train for it, but it's something nobody wants to be involved in. So, all our members who have been involved with them, I'm sure they replay those in their mind, especially after the event. I'm sure they replay them over and over and over and over for days, if not weeks, if not the rest of their career.
These things have had impacts on people in ways that are not necessarily evident at the time, but you can tell by the reporting, either right after the incident or even 20 years later, that it's still there and it still is being puzzled about why it happened. There's a person or people behind every one of these stories. That's true for the victim, that's true for the person who shot the person who becomes a victim. And there are real feelings, there are real human emotions involved in the incidents and in what happens after the incidents. And it's pretty hard not to feel this is something, if we could avoid it, we'd be much better off if we could. And I think the central question always for most people, if we keep doing what Vermont's been doing for the last 50 years, is why are there more killings every year? Every decade, why have there been substantially more? And we don't have an answer to that question, and we should find one.